Sometimes it feels like leadership in New Zealand isn't quite recognised to the level that we think it is, but we know it is. We've seen there's a lot of great talent in New Zealand. And often when the big roles come up in companies here that we have in New Zealand, they are often overlooked. And sometimes people in New Zealand are overlooked for those roles in our experience that we've seen.
Building a community around things like the hierarchy of needs and Tech Waka and engineering leadership are really important to share that knowledge, because again, you can feel lonely when you're an engineering leader.
Everyone feels it. I think that kind of imposter syndrome can be a superpower, but also can be quite crippling. So you've got to find the right balance with it to be something that you can see yourself as being a leader. And if you see yourself in the confidence of being a leader, that's a good sign that you're ready to take the next steps up.
Welcome to the Tech Waka podcast, where we dive into the journeys of New Zealand's top tech leaders. Your host for today is Jakub, bringing you conversations with tech leaders and innovators from across Aotearoa. Join us as we uncover the experiences, challenges, and successes that shape our tech community. This episode of the Tech Waka podcast is proudly brought to you by Wires Uncrossed, lifting the standard of software delivery across New Zealand, Australia, and beyond. A big thanks to Wires Uncrossed for supporting the Tech Waka mission and backing the voices of our tech leadership community. To learn more, go to wiresuncrossed.com.
Kia ora and welcome to Tech Waka. If you've ever looked at senior tech role in New Zealand and thought, do I actually have what it takes? Or wonder why boards sometimes seem starstruck by big offshore names? This episode is for you. Today I am joined by Meyrick and Stuart from Wires Uncrossed. Between them, they've led engineering teams across Silverstripe, MetService, BNZ and Xero, including senior roles at Xero during some of its biggest scaling years. And now they work with organizations across Aotearoa, helping leaders improve delivery systems, build capability, and get better outcomes with the investment they've got. In this conversation, we talk about why New Zealand leadership can be unrecognized, the hidden step change from excellent engineer to system leader, and why success gets harder to claim when you're enabling others rather than shipping the code yourself. We also get practical. How to develop the language to talk to the boards and execs, what signals suggest you're ready for the next step, and why imposter syndrome can be both a superpower and a trap. All right, let's get into it. Hi, Stu. Hi, Paul. How are you guys
Hi,
going?
Jakub. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jakub. Thanks for having us today.
It's a pleasure. Wires Uncrossed has been a sponsor of the podcast for almost a year now, so it's exciting to have someone from Wires Uncrossed again on the podcast, and having you two with this wealth of experience is really amazing. And maybe before we jump into the topics we briefly discussed before, maybe the two of you could give a short introduction of your previous experience so that you know that the background that you bring.
Yeah,
Paul,
sure.
you want to start?
I started off as a software engineer. I was a software engineer for about 15 years. And then I worked, as I was working for a company called Silverstripe, which is a great open source company in New Zealand. I got to the end level where I was a principal engineer. I'd worked there for a long time and I was thinking about what my next move was. And so I decided, I talked to my boss at the time, who was Clarion Coughlin. And she really helped me transition from principal engineer into a kind of management engineering leadership role. And she really taught me the kind of really great hygiene and strengths that you need to be an engineering leader. And Silverstripe was a great company to allow me to explore moving and transitioning between being a principal engineer and engineering leadership. And I really took to the role. I really started to enjoy the fact that in that role, you could start to grow, really great the engineers below you and really great people to start to think about the engineering system as a whole, not from an architecture point of view, but more from a people and capability view in an organization. And from Silverstripe, I moved on to BNZ, where I first met Stuart, who was the other member of Wires Uncrossed. From BNZ, I was there. I then moved to Xero, where I was an engineering leader, and I stayed there for 7 years and went from engineering leader all the way up to executive general manager of engineering, where I led the team that looks after the engineering practices within that company.
Oh, fantastic. What about you, Stu?
Probably a similar story in some ways. I started off in engineering, software engineering as well. Working for the UK government was my sort of first proper role out of university. And that role I did for a number of years before moving up in terms of the UK government's kind of grading system that they had at the time. So I did actually get an early taste of leadership in terms of leading people in that role, looking after some of the summer interns that the organisation had. And that gave me a really good sort of that initial taste of what it meant. Just I looked to hire someone, looked to bring someone on board, start to grow them and mentor them, even over just a short period of time. I later on moved into a kind of commercial company. I started to get some experience outside of government, working in the UK, and that was further my technical leadership, really my technical career, rather than my some people leadership. And later moved on to started at the end of that sort of journey that it was time to try something different, and that's when I made the move to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, I started working at MetService. I took a role working here in Wellington, up in Kelvin, and it's a very interesting subject matter. Weather, definitely something that I think New Zealanders and people from the UK have in common is talking about weather. And so it was a really good fit in terms of the topic. And in that role, started off again in senior engineering kind of positions, but moved into a more technical leadership role. And that technical leadership role was actually also team leadership. And so I ran some of the teams up at MetService. And it's our first sort of arrange a real leadership of multiple teams and helping those teams deliver. And then looking after those people and hiring and growing really good talent and making that talent be the experts and helping give them support to deliver. From there, as Paul mentioned, I went to BNZ, and that's where we crossed paths. At BNZ, initially I went back into some sort of contracting role. I think it's quite common for leaders to take that journey sometimes and go, oh, is this right for me? And I definitely had that point of questioning my leadership, if that's what I wanted to do. As I moved back into just coding and developing every day and engineering, which I really enjoyed. But it wasn't long before my opinions and noticed and was asked to look at moving on to the leadership role there. So I was part of the development software manager, delivery manager at VNZ. And later on, I looked after what we call our sort of agile practice and our coaching practice, our practice delivery. So we had a whole bunch of agile coaches, technical coaches and testing coaches at the organization. And we helped to work with that kind of enablement team to try and help the system go better, help the system work faster and more efficiently and deliver more output. And from there, I made the journey to Xero, going cross paths with Paul, took on a role as a GM of engineering, looking after multiple teams all around the world, which was one hell of an experience, but great fun. And decided to take that experience and try our own thing here at Wires Uncrossed, which has been really great, meeting lots of different clients and getting a wealth of different depths of different experience from different organizations in this role.
Working at the Wires Uncrossed, you spend a lot of time with leaders, both business leaders and technology leaders. What are some of the key observations from the last few years of your work in the New Zealand market? What are you learning about leadership and teams and organizations that is worth exploring?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think my observation is that we get to work across this really broad spectrum of size of organization, from the startup to the scale up to government or financial services to the large enterprises organizations. And everyone's facing a similar type of challenge at the moment. And that is, how can we get the investment in technology or engineering teams when money is tight, or we need to be there's a lot more focus on how we use the investment that we're given in technology and engineering in terms of that return on investment or the increase in productivity within organizations. And I think that's really important, or quite an interesting thing for engineering leaders who sometimes think that their problems are unique, or they're just looking down the barrel at a problem. And we talked earlier about how that's quite a lonely position for engineering leaders to be in. It's essentially quite a comforting knowledge to know that a lot of people are facing similar challenges. And so it's about, at Wires Uncrossed, what we get to help people with is how can they get that investment from boards, from executives, and then get the buy-in that it's the right type of work from the people that are in the organizations themselves, from the engineers to product leaders, so to anyone else that has a kind of interest in the engineering teams.
Yeah, I think it's great and very true. I think also what we've seen is there is lack of recognition of some of our leadership skills in New Zealand. And I think one of the things that we work well with leaders on, and what we talk to leaders about a lot, is around trying to use the right language, use the right, turn up to work the right way as a leader, and to try and really push the leadership in New Zealand. And that's obviously part of our mission, is that we want to try and help grow soft delivery, and part of your mission as well, around helping support leaders and doing that. And so I think one of the things that we've noticed is that there's lots of great talent in New Zealand, and we would like to try and help leaders be recognized more with that, and help them move into great leadership roles, executive leadership roles, senior leadership roles in the organizations that we have here in New Zealand and across the world.
It's quite normal for people to go from being engineers, maybe going to being senior engineers, principal engineers, and then trying to go into people leadership role and strategic leadership. Are there any patterns that you see that work for people or that don't work for people in those transitions?
I think that move is probably a bit of a hidden step change. You're going from that kind of, you're an excellent engineer, now you need to be a system leader, and you have to think about what, you have to move from being a senior technical leadership. It's that shift into sort of you're going from building solutions to having to design the conditions where the solutions happen, and that can happen repeatedly, and you can keep that system going. And you've got to look at how you can now, you've got great technical depth and what you have to do, but your ability is now to see how you can try and shape the whole system, be it product delivery, reliability, organization design, funding, the people, incentives to get people motivated. There's a whole system now that you can start looking at. I think one of the things I found the hardest in this shift is often the being able to claim success is a lot harder. It feels like it's a lot harder because now your success is so much more indirect. It's not just you solving a problem, getting some output, cutting some code. You've now got a whole bunch of people that you're trying to enable to do that and motivate to do that or work with to do that. And it's then that feeling of success is not necessarily you directly, it's through the people you work, but that's the realization that that's your job as a leader. That is great. If your team are doing well, then you're doing well.
I'm interested in how you find that, and like in your role. Yeah.
And I often wonder whether me, or maybe there's something similar for other leaders, though we sometimes mistake humility for invisibility. We sometimes almost try to be so humble, and it's not me, it's my team, that we often forget that, going back to what you said, that it's us who created that conditions or that system that allowed this to happen. And we often forget about that. And I think that's almost expected in New Zealand. And it's often easy to lose that confidence or that recognition for your own successes.
So that could be trivialized as well, right? That these are the things that you expected to have leader, right?
Yeah, especially that some of those things, when they seem easy because they come natural to us or because we are good at them, we just don't pay much attention. But for some other people, that's going to be a huge achievement because they cannot do that. And maybe that's the value that we bring to our teams and organizations that we often overlook because we are biased and we take it for granted.
Do you think then, as leaders, that we have a bit of a brand problem maybe sometimes, in terms of getting recognition for that? That's potentially why, sometimes it feels like leadership in New Zealand isn't quite recognized to the level that we think it is, but we know it is. We've seen there's a lot of great talent in New Zealand. And often when the big roles come up in companies here that we have in New Zealand, they are often overlooked. Sometimes people in New Zealand are overlooked for those roles in our experience that we've seen. And so do you think there's a bit of a brand issue in terms of having to try and start ourselves more, that we're not doing that well?
I think in New Zealand, we probably don't even talk about leadership enough in the technical space because we focus on that engineering side of things, as Paul was saying, just going into more architect side. And I think that's quite strongly how we think about technical leadership, but we forget about the other side of leadership, and we don't talk about what you guys do in the hierarchy of needs with frameworks for engineering. I think we forgot that there are frameworks for leadership as well, and we just assume, oh, you now have a role. Now go and lead people, go and lead strategy, go and lead your teams and vendors. But actually, there's a set of capability and frameworks and tools that as a leader you should have so that you can be effective in your role, but also you can help others develop in their leadership roles. Things like situational leadership, things like managing up and others that we often don't even know that exists. We don't get enough training so that we can be effective in their roles. I can see you guys nodding. What do you think?
No, I think that's true. I think probably is an element of maybe it's an engineering mentality in terms of the types that we often get in engineering. Maybe it, and these are pretty stereotypical comments, but maybe the cultural nature of people in New Zealand that don't want to necessarily step out and claim credit for other people's work, which probably as a leader it can often pull up you're doing if you're saying, we've achieved this and it's actually those people on my team that achieved that and I'm just leading them. But as you said before, you're setting up the environment and the system and setting it so they are able to achieve that. You're enabling them to give them that ability to do the work as a leader. And I think maybe we do need to work out how we can talk about ourselves a lot more confidently, I guess, in terms of the achievements that we've done. That you just listed a whole bunch of achievements that you've done, and it's about being able to talk about that and sell yourself a little more.
Yeah, maybe a part of it is that opportunity. Obviously, we were very lucky. Stuart and I were in the right place at the right time with Xero in terms of and we were exposed to an opportunity where there was the kind of opportunity to work on some really tricky problems and some scaling issues that people might not encounter. And an element of that is also, it obviously is that we were lucky to be there at the time when the company like that was scaling, and lucky to be in the roles that we were in, to be able to get exposure to seeing how the kind of intellectual challenge that comes with working for a company that's scaling as quickly as Xero was. There's not a lot of exposure to things like that within New Zealand. There are some really great companies and we're working with quite a few of those, as well as Uncrossed. The more we can kind of talk about what we encounter as Wires Uncrossed and understand, sharing the knowledge, and your platform does this, right? Then the podcast and the mentoring program that you've got does this. It's the knowledge across the community around kind of everyone has, whether you're a small company, large company, government agency, there's a lot of the challenges are the same. And so building a community around things like the hierarchy of needs and Tech Waka and engineering leadership are really important to share that knowledge, because again, you can feel lonely when you're an engineering leader.
Yeah, we need to challenge that kind of view that because New Zealand doesn't have many enterprises of this kind of big, large scale, therefore we can't have great leaders, and we can. And we've got great, capable people in New Zealand who can do that work. Yes, there maybe not be all the opportunities to do that with the limited size of some of the organizations within New Zealand compared to, say, Silicon Valley and other places, for example. But we need to try and challenge that and try and use the changes that we're building to try and help that.
Do you think there's something that we can recognize in being from New Zealand or living in New Zealand, that there's a unique trait to us that we can use to our advantage? Anything that you can call out?
I think one of the great things is what we talked about before on air, right? I looked at your back catalog and I recognize so many people in your back catalog from the work that I've done. And a lot of people know all each other within New Zealand. We're up across. Because of the nature of the country that we live in, we know each other. We know we've crossed paths so often with the people that are working in technology. And so there is I've worked with some really exceptional engineers in my time in New Zealand, and some really exceptional engineering leaders in my time in New Zealand. Some of which you've had on your podcast. And so how can we really do our best to support those leaders and also the work that they've been doing within engineering technology shops within New Zealand.
So maybe if we have some senior leaders listening us now, and maybe they're looking at how do they develop the leadership capability in their own organization, and maybe there are CEOs now reassessing their next hiring move or their senior leadership, any piece of advice you would have for them, how to approach some of the ways how they think about that, about their own leadership or the leaders they develop or the leaders they're looking for?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we often find is hacking, maybe the bit of a strong term, but the whole kind of view of system thinking is often something that with a lot of engineers that move up through the ranks into that kind of leadership roles, perhaps that isn't quite there. And so that's part of having that kind of language. It's the right language to think about the whole of the system, think about the trade-offs you have to make within that system, and be able to use that language in your conversations with senior stakeholders, with your executive, with your boards, and being able to have the right language, the right words, the right terms to make sure that you're aligned with them and aligned with what you're trying to achieve, and being able to present your goal in a way that they understand. And I think that's something that, as a leader that's trying to grow into those more senior roles, is something that's very important to think about how to achieve.
The person that has the hardest job is the person that has to hire the CTO or the head of engineering. They're taking it on the person to be able to take the investment that they want to put in the technology and see the return for that investment. Because they're not trivial amounts of money that people are being asked to look after. And it's easy for me to say that I know that great people are out there in New Zealand because I've worked with them, because I was exposed to these people through working at Xero and Silverstripe and other great organizations that we've got in New Zealand. But I think that you have to look at Xero as an example, in that the people that I worked for and helped me grow when I was in that organization, like Clarion, Coughlin, like Mark Rees, who was the CTO at Xero at the time, is that those people were here and they've grown this company to be the success that it is and the technology success that it is in the organization.
And then on the other hand, if there's a leader listening to us and they are wondering, how do I know if I'm operating at a senior level? What would be some signals that you think they should look for?
If I went back to when, I'd say, going from engineering leadership to head of engineering was the biggest step that I took and biggest leap that I took when I was at Xero. And was I ready? Probably not. But you don't know until you try these things, right? And I know there's a certain set of rules that I try to keep to as a leader, which is hire great people, hire the people, really set yourself really high standards when it comes to the people that you want to hire. Have really great hygiene around the things that really matter to you. So security, reliability, and prioritizing the most important things by measuring how effective your system is. Keep those kind of rules high. Keep those things at the top of your mind when you're thinking about taking your next step, and then trust yourself because of those successes that you've seen and the roles that you've had before.
I think one of the things that I probably noticed was finding that I was getting the job satisfaction from coaching others, helping others solve problems rather than solving them themselves. And when I got to that point of going, actually, I'm really enjoying building teams to try and solve problems rather than going in and being the one leading it and having to have all the answers. I think that was a really good signal. I guess it's a good signal for any kind of leadership. And then to move up into that sort of senior leadership, I think the other things that Paul said is really good there, but I think also it's probably that having that language to be able to see yourself as a peer with the people you're chatting to. And so having the right kind of words, the right language to be able to go in and have those conversations with the CTOs and the execs and being part of that team and not feeling like you're an imposter, which I know is something that often happens by a lot of leaders, and I felt it, everyone feels it. I think that kind of imposter syndrome can be a superpower, but also can be quite crippling. So you've got to find the right balance with that to be something that you can see yourself as being a leader. And if you see yourself in the confidence of being a leader, that's a good sign that you're ready to take the next steps up.
I think having the courage to fail is a really important part of this. And understanding that everyone fails in those engineering leadership roles as well. Like the people that you are feeling that imposter syndrome about, they have all had their big failures along the way and try things. I've had a lot of failures in my career where I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, and then turned out to be that you're adding complexity rather than removing complexity from a system. I think having that courage to fail is really important as a leader.
And I think using the hindsight so that looking back and, I realized that now a year ago when I was trying to do something, actually knowing what I know now, that probably was not the best decision or not the best move. But of course, it's easy for me to say it now, standing here where I'm standing, and having that ability to reflect and acknowledge that, hey, that was not a good choice. What can I learn from that? How can I make sure that next time I can be better? And going back to what you were saying about being in that peer group of other leaders, especially I think when you move to senior leadership group or executive leadership group, when you have peers out from outside of technology, what I found really interesting and what I think helped me was recognizing that I'm no longer a technology leader. Yes, that's my responsibility part, but I'm a business leader now, part of the business leaders, and understanding the language that is used, understanding the trade-offs, not only in technology, but from outside of technology, understanding the governance, the risks. That's what helped me, I think, elevate my influence, but also take that step in confidence and in the language that I can use in understanding the conversation so that, yes, the imposter syndrome is still there, but maybe there's more no unknowns now. Before there were unknown unknowns, and it was really hard for me to show up in some of those conversations with an opinion or with understanding how technology can help. Do you think that's
very much? I think trying to have that empathy again of your peers now in your exec and what their goals are, what their outcomes are from a business point of view. And then, as you said, you're no longer just looking after the technology system. You're now having to look after a whole part of the whole business system that's going on, and understanding that they've got goals and outcomes, and there are things that they need to achieve too. And you will need to do the trade-offs at that level now, not just at the level of, how do I make this engineering system deliver with more output and more efficient?
I think this is where I struggled most in my transition to senior leadership. You find that balance between being idealistic and pragmatic.
Yes.
The principal engineer and the kind of engineer at heart wants to be as idealistic as I can be with everything. But obviously everything comes with trade-off, and there's the commercial realities of companies, or you just might not have the people. And so as you go up the ladder, you just need to be thinking about, how do I balance being pragmatic against idealistic in my approach to the outcome for the business?
So what I'm hearing is that we do have really great leaders and great potential in New Zealand, in the technology space. And maybe some of the gap is in the system level visibility or system understanding, system thinking. Maybe it's part of in the language and in our culture. What would be some of the key, maybe 1, 2, 3 points that we can give to leaders when they are a bit lost, when they feel lonely, when they're thinking about 2026, their career, how they can get help or how they can grow and step up?
I guess firstly, if you're feeling about lonely, there is a community of leaders in New Zealand, and I guess it's reaching out to those via your podcast and via that, or directly via LinkedIn. There's a lot of people out there talking about leadership, and there's meetups in Auckland and definitely in Christchurch, and I think others around. Are really important. Get more to meet others. I think that's really important to do that networking, which for some people is not always the thing that they enjoy the most, often depending on people's personality. But I think it's important to get out there and chat to people, even if it's people that you worked with previously. Just get out there, meet them, chat, and connect.
Yeah, I do that. I think find great people that you trust the judgment of, and stick to the kind of instincts and basics of good engineering leadership, which is high grade people, which I talked about before, prioritize the things that are really important in the engineering system, that are kind of things that you have to pull the end on code for in your organization or your engineering system, and really focus and bring accountability to the people that work you around those things that you care about, and just to accept the blenders and find comfort in the idea that most people are facing the similar challenges to what you are. There are not a lot of problems that are unique in this organization, whether it's from like an old tech stack that you have to modernize, or you have to you have to try to get investment from a board in trying to get your engineering system to improve. Like that, everyone out there has faced the problems that you have. So just try and find some comfort in that.
Yeah, I think the final thing would be
Nice.
don't be scared of using some frameworks. I don't actually have to learn them or everything you're doing, but I definitely think they are useful to give you a good starting point or to give you the right language, be it from looking at how you view engineering systems, such as what we do in terms of hierarchy of engineering, or if it's around just leadership in general. And there's so much out there around how to be a good leader. One of my favorites is the Neuro Leadership Institute. I really have enjoyed some of the books that have come out from there and some of the courses and material that they talk about, such as the SCARF model, which I found a very useful model through my career in terms of understanding how people are thinking and what's important to them, what triggers them, what they get reward from. And that can be used in those difficult conversations and times of change. So I think it's finding those sort of frameworks and things that connect with you as a leader. There's a lot out there, and you'll find the things that are right for you and the ones that work for you and help you with your career, your leadership.
And hire Wires Uncrossed and listen to Tech Waka, obviously.
Of course.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Stuart. It was a very generous and practical conversation. And I can imagine a lot of New Zealand leaders, they will hear themselves in the conversation, their own problems, challenges. Hopefully that's going to be a good introduction to the new year and a lot of inspiration for people to step up and to maybe take on new roles or find the confidence they need to keep going.
And thank you for your time today. Thanks for inviting us on the podcast. And we've really enjoyed being a sponsor of the podcast over the last couple of years.
Yeah, second that. Awesome. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. All right. That was Paul Meyrick and Stuart Collins from Wires Uncrossed. A few things I'm taking away. Senior leadership is less about having all the answers and more about designing the conditions where good decisions and great delivery can happen repeatedly. And in New Zealand, a big part of the gap isn't capability. It's visibility, language, and confidence, without slipping into ego. If you're feeling a bit lonely in leadership, take their advice, find your people, build your peer group, and don't be afraid to use frameworks as a starting point, whether that's around delivery, systems, or leadership itself. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with one tech leader in your world who needs a confidence boost going into 2026. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Tech Waka so you don't miss what's coming next. Cheers.
A special thanks to our sponsor, Wires Uncrossed, helping teams across New Zealand, Australia, and beyond untangle software delivery and build systems that truly perform. We're grateful for their support in making this conversation possible. Check them out at wiresuncrossed.com.